Life Stories brings you powerful tales of redemption, resilience, and change. Today, we share the compelling journey of Officer Tom Jenkins, whose prejudices led to an unjust arrest, and Captain Lucas Thomas, whose leadership and grace sparked a transformation. Through confronting hard truths, embracing accountability, and finding forgiveness, Tom embarked on a journey of profound growth. This is a story about breaking barriers, rebuilding trust, and the courage to change. Subscribe to Life Stories to join us in exploring this unforgettable tale of justice, empathy, and hope. Let's begin today's story. The sun was warm that afternoon in the lively streets of Chicago, Illinois. Life unfolded as it always did in the city, people walking briskly, others lingering in conversation, some lost in their own thoughts as the world moved around them. Amid the bustle was Marie Thomas, her confident stride standing out. She wore a simple yet elegant dress that flowed gracefully with her steps, and a golden chain glinted around her neck, catching the sunlight. The necklace wasn't just an accessory, it was a cherished gift from her husband, Lucas, a symbol of their bond and the love they shared. As Marie passed a row of parked police cruisers, Officer Tom Jenkins leaned against one of them, sipping his coffee. Tom was a veteran on the force, but his years in uniform hadn't earned him respect, they had only deepened his arrogance. His uniform, to him, wasn't a symbol of duty but a license to exert authority, often in ways that crossed ethical lines. Prejudices ran deep in Tom's worldview. He didn't see the city's vibrant diversity, instead, he saw division. And he believed himself to be above it all. Tom's attention was drawn to the gleam of the chain around Marie's neck. Her poised demeanor irritated him further. She walked with her head high, unbothered, not intimidated by his presence as others might have been. She didn't quicken her pace or cast her gaze downward. Instead, she passed him without so much as a glance. For Tom, her composure felt like a challenge, a dismissal of his supposed authority. His ego bristled. "Hey, you," he called out sharply, setting his coffee cup on the hood of the cruiser. His tone carried an edge that sliced through the city noise. Marie stopped, turning to face him, her brow furrowed slightly in confusion. But her voice remained polite. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" Tom approached her, his expression stern, the kind he had practiced countless times to intimidate. "That chain around your neck, where'd you get it?" Marie blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the question. "It's mine," she said evenly. "It was a gift from my husband." Tom folded his arms, scrutinizing her with suspicion. "A gift? Huh. Looks pretty expensive. You sure it's yours? You match the description of someone reported for theft." Her face hardened slightly, though her voice remained calm. "I assure you, officer, I haven't stolen anything. This chain is mine." Tom had already decided. In his mind, her confidence was defiance, and her possession of something valuable was a red flag. "A likely story," he scoffed. "People like you always have excuses." Marie's jaw tightened, but she didn't let her frustration show. "People like me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Tom stepped closer, his posture aggressive. "You know exactly what I mean. Now, I need you to come with me for questioning. We'll sort this out at the station." Marie's heart raced with frustration and anger, but she refused to let him see it. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said firmly. "This is a mistake." Tom's lips curled into a mocking smirk. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can walk around with stolen jewelry and get away with it. Let's go." Marie's patience was wearing thin, but she remained composed. "Officer," she said, her voice tinged with quiet determination, "I'm asking you to think carefully about what you're doing. This chain is mine, and I've done nothing to warrant this treatment. Please, don't make a decision you'll regret." Her words only fueled Tom's arrogance. "Regret? Oh, I don't think so." This is fun for me, putting people like you in your place. It's part of the job. Marie felt her stomach churn at his words. But she kept her composure. I'm warning you, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You don't know who I am. And you don't know what you're doing. Tom let out a harsh laugh. One that echoed down the street. Oh. I know exactly what I'm doing. Now stop stalling. As he reached for his handcuffs, Marie made a decision. Without drawing attention, she slipped her hand into her pocket and pressed a single button on her phone. Dialing her husband. Lucas. She didn't speak. Didn't give away what she was doing. But she knew Lucas would understand. He always did. Oblivious to the call, Tom clicked the cuffs around her wrists with a triumphant smirk. Let's see how confident you are behind bars, he sneered. Marie said nothing as he led her to his cruiser. She sat in the back seat, her expression calm. Though her mind raced, she wasn't thinking only of herself. This moment represented so many who had faced similar unjust treatment. She knew Lucas would be listening on the other end of the call, his quiet fury building with every word he overheard. At the station, Tom paraded her inside as though he'd captured a notorious criminal. He ignored the questioning glances from his colleagues, too caught up in his own sense of power. Marie, however, remained poised, her dignity unshaken even as Tom continued his barrage of insults. You should be grateful I'm not pressing more charges, Tom said, leaning against the desk with a smirk. Your attitude doesn't match your status. People like you need to learn their place. Marie met his gaze with unwavering calm. You're making a mistake, she said again. But don't worry, you'll understand soon enough. Tom laughed dismissively. We'll see about that. As he smirked, convinced of his small victory, Captain Lucas Thomas was already en route to the station. He had heard everything, and each word had sharpened his resolve. This wasn't just about his wife, it was about justice. Lucas had no intention of letting this stand. The atmosphere at the police station was bustling as usual, with officers busy at their desks, phones ringing, and reports being filed. Amid this controlled chaos, Marie sat quietly in a holding cell. Her posture was upright, her demeanor calm, as if the cold metal bars surrounding her were nothing more than an inconvenience. Despite the insult and humiliation of being unjustly arrested, Marie refused to let it break her spirit. This wasn't about her, it was about standing tall in the face of systemic injustice. About the dignity she wouldn't allow anyone to strip from her. Tom Jenkins, however, was reveling in his imagined victory. Leaning against his desk, he smirked as he recounted his version of events to a fellow officer. She thought she could just walk around like she owned the place, he said with a chuckle. But I put her in her place. People like her think they're untouchable. The other officer, visibly uncomfortable with Tom's tone, shifted uneasily. What exactly did she do? Jenkins, he asked, his voice cautious. Tom waved his hand dismissively. Oh, you know the type. Wearing an expensive chain, acting all high and mighty. I asked her a simple question, and she got defensive. Classic guilty behavior. The officer raised an eyebrow. Defensive. Did she resist arrest? No, Tom admitted, his smirk faltering for a moment. But you could tell. Arrogant. Like she thought she was better than us. The officer didn't respond, but his skepticism was evident as his gaze shifted to the holding cell where Marie sat with quiet dignity. Tom, oblivious to the unease around him, continued to bask in his self-perceived authority. Meanwhile, Captain Lucas Thomas arrived at the station. Unlike Tom, Lucas didn't make a spectacle of his entrance. He walked in with purpose, his uniform sharp and his badge gleaming. There was no need for theatrics, his presence alone commanded respect. The room seemed to still as he scanned it, his sharp gaze landing on Tom, who was still recounting his victory to an increasingly disinterested colleague. Jenkins, Lucas said evenly, his voice carrying an authority that made heads turn. Tom looked up, startled. nearly dropping the coffee cup in his hand. "Captain Thomas," he stammered, attempting to compose himself. "I didn't know you were coming in today." Lucas's expression remained unreadable, his tone steady but cold. "I wasn't planning to. But I heard something on my way home that required my immediate attention." Tom shifted uncomfortably under Lucas's gaze, suddenly aware that something was very wrong. "What? What was that, sir?" Without answering, Lucas walked past Tom and headed straight for the holding cells. When he reached Marie, his expression softened slightly, though his jaw remained tight with restrained anger. "Marie," he said gently, his voice warm and familiar. "Are you all right?" Marie rose from the bench, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I'm fine, Lucas," she replied. "But I think you need to have a word with one of your officers." Lucas turned back to face Tom, who had followed him, his expression a mix of confusion and unease. "Jenkins," Lucas said, his voice sharp now, cutting through the room like a blade. "Why is my wife in a cell?" The room fell silent. Tom's face drained of color as the weight of Lucas's words hit him. Your wife," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Lucas said, his tone icy. "My wife. The woman you arrested without cause." Tom's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to find words. I thought. I mean. She was acting suspicious. And the chain? Don't." Lucas interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't try to justify this. I heard everything. Jenkins. Every word you said. Do you have any idea how disgraceful your behavior was?" Tom's legs felt weak, and he stumbled backward slightly. "Captain. Save your excuses," Lucas snapped. "You've shown me exactly who you are. And let me tell you something, you don't deserve to wear that badge." The tension in the room was palpable. Other officers exchanged uneasy glances, none daring to intervene. Lucas's voice carried authority, but there was also something deeply personal in his tone, anger not just as a captain, but as a husband who had heard his wife's dignity being trampled on. "I'm suspending you," Lucas continued, his voice steady but firm. "Effective immediately. Turn in your badge and weapon before you leave this building. And before you even think about returning. You will complete mandatory anti-racism training and therapy. 6 months minimum." Tom's knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor, his head bowed in desperation. "Captain. Please," he begged. "I made a mistake. I'll change. Please don't do this." Lucas didn't respond immediately, his piercing gaze bore into Tom, the silence more damning than any words could have been. Finally, he spoke, his tone calm but resolute. "This isn't about me, Jenkins. This is about you. The way you've treated people, my wife included, is unacceptable. You've disrespected the uniform you claim to honor." From the cell, Marie stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Lucas," she said softly, "let him go through the training and therapy. Maybe he'll learn. Maybe he'll change. But don't take away his chance to prove himself." Lucas turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Are you sure?" Marie nodded. "Yes. If we don't give him a chance, how will he ever learn?" Lucas sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Fine," he said, turning back to Tom. "You have 6 months to prove that you can change. If you fail, you're done. Understood?" Tom nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Lucas unlocked the cell and helped Marie out, his protective arm around her shoulders as they left the station. As they drove home, the tension in Lucas's body began to ease, though his anger toward Tom lingered. "You handled that well," Lucas said, glancing at Marie. "Better than I would have." Marie smiled faintly. "People like Tom don't need hatred. They need education. And maybe, just maybe, he'll become a better person because of this." Lucas reached over and squeezed her hand. You're incredible. You know that. Marie chuckled softly. I've had a good teacher. As they pulled into the driveway of their home, the weight of the day lifted slightly. Together, they stepped inside, leaving the chaos behind, though both knew that the work toward justice and change was far from over. The weight of Lucas's words hung heavy in Tom Jenkins's mind long after he left the precinct that evening. The walk from his desk to the exit, stripped of his badge and holster, felt endless. The looks from his colleagues ranged from pity to quiet judgment, and he was keenly aware of the whispers that followed him out the door. For the first time in years, Tom felt small not in power, but in his sense of self. The authority he had once clung to so tightly now felt hollow. The next morning, Tom found himself sitting in the sterile conference room of an anti-racism training program. The facilitator, a firm but compassionate woman named Angela, introduced herself to the group. This is a space for learning and accountability, she said. The work we're about to do isn't easy, but it's necessary. The first step is acknowledging our biases. Change begins when we choose to see what we've been avoiding. Tom sat at the back of the room, arms crossed defensively. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he wasn't prepared to feel so exposed. Angela wasted no time. She began by sharing stories from people who had been harmed by prejudice, each one hitting like a blow to Tom's chest. A black woman named Denise described being unfairly targeted by law enforcement, her voice trembling as she recounted how it had affected her family. A Latino man, Miguel, spoke about the fear his community felt every day, even when they hadn't done anything wrong. Tom wanted to dismiss their words, to say it wasn't his fault. But as the stories piled up, something began to crack within him. These weren't abstract statistics or distant events, they were human experiences. Raw and real. For the first time, he saw himself not as a defender of the law, but as someone who had contributed to the pain these people described. At one point, Angela turned to Tom directly. "Officer Jenkins," she said, her tone even but pointed. "Can you share why you're here?" Tom hesitated, feeling the weight of the room's attention. I made a mistake," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "I arrested someone without cause. I thought I was just doing my job, but I was wrong." Angela nodded, her expression neither forgiving nor condemning. "What made you think it was okay?" "I don't know," Tom admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought I was enforcing the law. I thought I was right." Angela's gaze softened slightly, acknowledging that is a start. But understanding why you thought you were right is where the real work begins. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of Tom's life. The training sessions forced him to confront the biases he had ignored for years. In therapy, Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken but firm therapist, guided him through the uncomfortable process of self-reflection. "Tom," she asked during one session, "what did you see when you looked at Marie that day? What made you decide she was suspicious?" Tom fidgeted in his seat. I don't know," he muttered. "She was confident. Maybe too confident. It felt like she was challenging me." Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. "And you found her confidence threatening?" Tom nodded slowly, his face flushing with shame. "I guess I did." "And why do you think that is?" Dr. Patel pressed. Tom struggled for an answer, but the truth was already forming in his mind. His father's voice echoed in his memory, harsh, judgmental, full of disdain for anyone who didn't fit into his narrow worldview. "Because I was taught to see people like her as less than," Tom admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never questioned it. I just believed it." Dr. Patel leaned forward, her expression gentle but serious. "Believing it doesn't make it true, Tom. But understanding where those beliefs come from is how you start to change them." The turning point came when Dr. Patel asked Tom to write a letter not to Marie or Captain Lucas, but to his former self. "Tell him what you've learned," she instructed. "Be honest." Tom sat with the task for hours, struggling to put his feelings into words. When he finally read the letter aloud in his next session, his voice cracked with emotion. "I didn't realize how much harm I was doing," he wrote. "I thought I was protecting the community, but I was protecting my own biases. I was enforcing division, not justice." As he read, tears streamed down his face. For the first time, Tom saw himself clearly not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who had the power to choose differently. By the end of the 6 months, Tom was a changed man. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been transformative. He returned to the precinct, nervous but determined. Lucas was waiting for him, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Well?" Lucas asked, his tone neutral. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Tom took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he began. "Not just to you and Marie, but to everyone I've wronged. I've spent these months learning about the damage I've caused. And I know I can't undo the past. But I want to be better. I want to make things right." Lucas studied him for a long moment. "And how do I know you're not just saying what I want to hear?" "You don't," Tom admitted. "But I can show you. Give me a chance. And I'll prove that I've changed." Lucas nodded slowly. "We'll see. You're on probation. One misstep, and you're out for good." Tom nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." As Tom walked back into the precinct, he felt a cautious optimism. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to take the first step. This wasn't just about redemption, it was about rebuilding trust and making amends. One day at a time. As the sun set over Chicago, Tom Jenkins stood on the steps of the precinct, reflecting on the journey that had transformed him. The 6 months of training and therapy had been grueling, but they had opened his eyes to the impact of his actions. Now, as he watched officers and community members working together with a renewed sense of trust, he felt hope for change and for a better future. Inside, Captain Lucas Thomas and his wife, Marie, smiled as they saw the precinct embracing reform. Marie's grace and forgiveness had been the catalyst for a ripple effect that reached far beyond that one fateful day. If this story of redemption and resilience inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more powerful tales that remind us of the strength of love, accountability, and the human spirit.